In the first episode on social evolution, we looked at human society and culture in the natural paradigm, being at one with nature and adapting our society and culture to our environment. In this episode, we will see how society and culture adapted to the first significant paradigm shift in the history of humanity, as some populations evolved from the natural paradigm to the control paradigm. The new paradigm is being in control and adapting our environment, ecosystem and society to satisfy the needs of our population. It's a mindset which says we no longer have to adapt to changes in our environment and ecosystem. Instead, we modify our physical environment, our ecosystem and society. We take control. The paradigm shift was triggered by a small but significant change in climate. The last glacial period ended 12,000 years ago. Temperatures rose by 5 degrees C. The change in temperature meant that the world became warmer and wetter. As a result, some regions became much more fertile and naturally produced a lot more food. We saw in the energy balance model that food density is the only variable which can impact forager population size. We can use our agent-based model of forager bands in a tribal territory to see what impact increased food density would actually have on populations. If part of the territory becomes more fertile and the bands come together as a tribe, we would expect the population to rise to the new carrying capacity. What we actually see is that the population begins to drop. Then the surviving bands separate and end up occupying separate ranges and revert to an alliance as before. But why? The population doesn't rise because forager society is a mesh-type social network with strong relationships. The number and strength of relationships depend on individual learning capacity. And this doesn't change just because there's more food. It's a stable trait of biological evolution. Forager society as a mesh network with strong relationships can only grow to around 40 people regardless of food density. There are two ways in which increasing food density will increase populations. One is for the population to evolve biologically into a new species with a much higher learning capacity, which would make mesh networks with egalitarian functionality a possibility. Given that it took 2 million years for Homo sapiens to evolve, that could be a long wait and may not even be possible. The other is to evolve socially, for society and culture to adapt to this new situation and become a single society. Social evolution is a much quicker process than biological evolution. It was the second which happened, enabling small forager societies to become large tribal societies in a relatively short time. The first and most important cultural change was in the way food is produced. Foraging is year-round repetitive labour, finding enough food every day, eating it within days, and then every few days or weeks moving on to a new temporary location in search of new supplies of food. It's an immediate return system of food production with a nomadic lifestyle. Agriculture is very different. Weeks or even months of preparatory labour on land, crops and animals produce little. Then large amounts of food are gathered over a short time period with intense activity, and the food is preserved and stored to be eaten over later weeks and months. It's a delayed return system in one settled location with a larger population. Foragers use their intimate knowledge of nature to plant and grow crops in fertile ground, horticulture, and to domesticate animals, pastoralism. They also develop ways to preserve and store food to make it available in quantity all year round. Farming was added to foraging as a combined means of food production. Horticulture was added to gathering, pastoralism to hunting, and settlement to roaming. Commonly known as the agricultural revolution, it would be better to think of it as agricultural evolution, taking many thousands of years to establish in different parts of the world, and eventually becoming the dominant system of food production in many regions, although foraging continues to make a significant contribution. Comparison of social networks shows that mesh networks are more cohesive and more efficient than either hierarchical or hybrid networks. In mesh networks, the number and strength of personal relationships give rise to high levels of cohesion and efficiency. In the examples shown here, the number of relationships is 5, not the 40 of forager bands, but the principle is the same. We saw in the last episode that forager bands are limited to around 40 people by the evolutionary stable traits of brain size and individual learning capacity. For society to adapt to a farming culture with larger populations, the structure of the social network must change to either a hierarchy or hybrid type of network. Of the two, the hybrid network is better because, for the same larger population, the level of cohesion is close to that of a mesh network, even though efficiency is still considerably lower. We will see later how society adapts to compensate for the loss of efficiency. For a hybrid network to evolve, a dominance hierarchy must emerge from interaction to complement the cooperative mesh networks. Dominance requires differences in individual and group power, the use of force and the exercise of authority. Cooperation emerges with individuals of the same power. In agricultural society, the main source of power is control of the means of food production, which comes from ownership of land. Ownership of land and the food produced on the land gives the owners control of essential resources, which gives them power over and control of others who produce the food. These activities combine as a reinforcing loop which sustains the dominance hierarchy. The inequality in power which establishes and maintains the dominance hierarchy makes social inequality inevitable in hybrid networks. Real-life networks are not as neat and tidy as those in the examples. Numbers, structures, and strength of relationship vary considerably, and although learning capacity is a constant constraint, it varies from individual to individual. However large and complex a hybrid farming society may be, to replace forager mesh society, the lost efficiency must be regained. In the last episode, we saw that efficiency in forager society is increased by taking advantage of diversity. The example showed how Julio making bows and Sophia hunting rabbits improved efficiency. A role is a set of behaviours, rights, responsibilities, duties, obligations and symbols occupied by an individual. In large farming societies, efficiency is increased by having more people in more roles and combining them in social institutions. A social institution is a set of controlled roles which carries out a recognised function in society. A farm is an example of a social institution in agricultural society, which carries out the function of food production. As societies grow larger, functional roles and institutions combine as social systems. The institution of the farm combines with individual roles to form the food production system. As culture and society evolve, systems become more complex, and informal behavioural norms are supplemented with formal rules and codified laws, which coordinate and regulate roles and institutions so that they function effectively. Society becomes a set of interconnected functional systems, with institutionalized systems of governance in control. The institutions of governance are legislation, coordination, and regulation, each with distinct functions, and governance becomes government. Government coordinates and regulates roles, institutions, and systems to maximize overall efficiency. Increasing specialization in roles and institutions increases the efficiency of systems, but a system's efficiency also depends on how well its parts interact. The goods and services produced in the parts are exchanged within and between systems to enable society to function efficiently as a whole. Exchange systems are added to production systems, and the combined systems are controlled by the systems of government. Barter is a simple exchange system which copes well with a single exchange, which is immediate, the deal is done, the exchange is made, and the parties move on. Barter is effective for immediate one-to-one exchange, but not for multiple transactions between multiple parties over extended time periods. To overcome this limitation, a system of exchange emerged, a system called trade. Trade uses currency to overcome the limitations of barter. Currency is a tangible means of intermediate exchange which has no intrinsic value. Its value is assigned to it and guaranteed by the government which controls trade. Government controls trade by making and enforcing two essential sets of rules for the exchange of goods and services. Property rules determine what constitutes ownership, the rights of ownership, the responsibilities of ownership, and how ownership can be transferred. Contract rules determine what can be exchanged and how, the rights of the parties, the obligations of the parties, and what makes an agreement fair. Societies have different rules, but they exist in some form in all societies, because without them a complex society cannot function. As society and culture evolve, and humans take increasing control of the natural world, beliefs about the spiritual world change to complement the changes in society. Consistent with the control paradigm is the belief that everything in nature which is not controlled by humans, including humans themselves, is controlled by supernatural beings in the spiritual world, deities or gods. Every agricultural population has its gods, but different beliefs in different places give rise to different religions, each with their deities and practices. Like human society, the spiritual world is hierarchical, and senior gods have authority over the other gods. The forager belief in an afterlife evolves with two variations. One is that the soul leads an eternal life in the spiritual kingdom. The other is that the soul visits the spiritual world temporarily and is repeatedly reincarnated until it finally rests in the spiritual kingdom. In both cases, behavior in earthly life determines what happens in spiritual life. Moral behavior is rewarded and immoral behavior punished, in the first case for eternity, and in the second until all the lessons of life have been learned. As populations grow, religions become institutions, each with its own beliefs, roles, buildings, artifacts, books, symbols, myths, ceremonies, and rituals. As a social system, religion serves a number of important functions in human society. Religious beliefs explain things which cannot be understood empirically. They create a consistent and coherent view of the world, which enables people to find their way in life. Shared beliefs, ceremonies, and rituals promote a sense of togetherness and belonging across the whole of society. They increase cohesion in a large hybrid society. Religious morality provides a behavioral framework with built-in supernatural regulation, which cannot be established by consensus. In agricultural society, there are three ways of categorizing behavior as either moral or immoral, each with its own regulation system. Behavioral norms in social groups, regulated by reciprocity in interpersonal relationships. Behavioral laws determined by government in a hierarchy, regulated by law enforcement. And behavioral doctrine of religion, regulated by the belief in reward and punishment in the afterlife. The three ways to categorize behavior as good or bad are not always consistent, and are often the cause of friction in large societies. 10,000 years of social evolution saw a consistent and stable model of agricultural society emerge, which aligns with the control paradigm. Everything in the real world is controlled by beings in the spiritual world. Humans control the environment and ecosystems which produce their food. And powerful humans control other humans within a hierarchical structure. Society is structured as hybrid social networks of individuals, roles, and institutions, and functions as a set of coordinated social systems. Within the hierarchy, the aristocracy or theocracy, about 2% of the population, own the land and create wealth from food production and trade. About 8% of artisans and bureaucrats own their knowledge and skills, and create wealth from the goods and services they produce. The majority, about 90%, own nothing. They are the peasants, serfs, and slaves. They have no voice and no wealth. Roles and social status are determined by birth and gender, not by ability or aptitude. And institutions of government and religion are financed by systems of taxes and tithes, levied on wealth created by ownership and trade. At this point, society and culture cease to adapt. Social evolution has stalled. Society has evolved to an evolutionary stable state. Stability does not mean that there are no disturbances. It means that, following a disturbance, the system returns to its stable state. In the control paradigm, there is a constant struggle for dominance, wealth, and resources amongst the powerful players in the hierarchy. Those with power and wealth fight to keep and expand it. Those without it try to take power and wealth from those who have it. Although these disturbances are frequent and often violent, the nature of society, how it is structured and functions, does not change. There is no theoretical limit to the size of a hybrid social network. What limits the size of society in practice is the ability of governance systems to maintain control. Powerful rulers bring societies together in larger networks. When they become too large to control, they collapse into smaller networks again. Tribes become nations and nations become empires. Then empires collapse into nations and nations into tribes. Then the cycle repeats. The tribes and nations are not always the same geographically or politically after the fall of empire, but they do all fit the same social model. Agriculture spread slowly around the world, and after about 10,000 years had replaced foraging in most but not all regions. As agriculture spread, increased food production was reflected in population growth, and by the year 1500 CE, numbers had grown from 4.5 million to around 450 million, with an annual growth rate of 0.04%. 10 times higher than the 0.004% of the previous 200,000 years. Increasing population is a good outcome for the human species, but agriculture was not so good for the majority of humans. The change in diet from a wide variety of forage foods to a small number of staple foods called widespread malnutrition. Increased population densities and unhygienic living conditions increased the spread of disease. As a consequence, more people were unhealthy, average life expectancy fell, and mortality rates increased. Life for the majority consisted of hard labour, poverty, subservience, malnourishment, sickness, and an early death. By the year 1300 CE, the standard model of agricultural society was firmly established. The powerful minority played their dominance games and controlled the powerless majority who accepted their fate. The status quo was maintained with a combination of economic, military, and spiritual power. Then a single event triggered another paradigm shift, and culture and society had to adapt to the new situation. It's that paradigm shift and its impact which we will turn to in the next episode.